Today on the Escape Pod, delving into the genius of Jimi Hendrix guitar, vocals, and songwriting. The song is Lover Man from the album In the West. It's a live version, and I hope you'll enjoy this microscopic view of the universe of one Jimi Hendrix song on the Escape Pod. Welcome back to another episode of the M-Pommy Escape Pod. What I want to check out right now is Jimi Hendrix Lover Man, and it's a short track, about 3 minutes or so, from a live album called In the West. Or before we listen to it, I want to give a little background about why this came onto my radar, because it's not the most popular Jimi Hendrix song of all time, not by a long stretch. It just came up on the shuffle. I was working, listening to music, and it came up randomly. And it just made me think how much we take Hendrix for granted. There's no way that I, having been born in 1972, I can't imagine the hysteria and the revolution that was happening when this man was alive and making new music. And to make my ignorance even worse, during my formative years, I rebelled against Hendrix because he was too popular. And in junior high and in high school, I ended up spending a lot more time listening to the people that Hendrix had influenced and the people that he was influenced by. And in a way, I spent my life, like most of my life, only enjoying the bread and missing the best part of the sandwich. As someone with a lot more knowledge than I have could do a whole season, a whole series of podcasts about the different aspects of Hendrix's music and his life. But for now, I just want to focus on this one tune, and even just on this one version of the tune. This is a live version. The album is called Hendrix in the West. And as far as I know, the studio version is on Both Sides of the Sky, which is one of those posthumous releases. There's so many weird problems with the Hendrix catalog. It's really hard for somebody like me who's not intimately associated with the history and the disputes. I don't know what is a definitive version, but this live version, it just jumped out of me from the shuffle, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The show is Berkeley, May 30th, 1970. I don't know. He may have played multiple times on that date. I don't know if this is an early show or a late show. It's with Billy Cox on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums. It's the Cry of Love tour. The recording is about 4 months before Hendrix's death. Based on having looked at YouTube videos and listened to other versions of the song, he was playing this on that tour. So I think you can hear it from LA, you can hear it from Seattle. So this is not a total one-off. We think about Hendrix, think about the epic guitar prowess and the big, big solos like Voodoo Child and Machine Gun. And I think some people tend to focus on the hits, the really popular songs like Hey Joe and Are You Experienced? But even in his super all too short career, Hendrix managed to cover a really diverse palette of music that was incredibly forward thinking. It was really, really experimental. But also it was the more I listened to it, it was very organized and very, very deliberate. And I think a lot of that comes to play in Lover Man. While it's structured somewhat like a 12-bar blues, it also has what I call decoration, things that make it a little more special or a little more unique compared to just a straight 12-bar. It's got a rock riff, one of those to die for Hendrix riffs that he could just throw out, it seems like, anytime he wanted. And the song is kind of built around that. It's at the beginning, it's in the middle, it's at the end. Another thing about the arrangement is, even though that riff is at the very end, there's also an ending. It's like a bridge, but it's at the end. They don't go back into the chorus or back into a verse. They go into the riff and then the song's over. That's more of a journey rather than a 12-bar that just kind of goes around and around in a cycle. You could talk, I I would go back and listen to this while I was writing this essay. And, you listen to 2 seconds, and you go back, you listen to 7 seconds, and you go back. I mean, it's like studying the Talmud. And there's so much detail. There's so much value. Everything in there is worth mentioning. So the opening riff, studio version and live version, is the same. Let's give it a listen on the In the West version. This is the opening riff. I know this is sacrilegious to kind of play the song and talk about it and interrupt it, but what you should do is when you're done listening to this, just listen to the whole song, think about the discussion, and let me know if you hear other things or if I've maybe amplified your appreciation of this little masterpiece. Check out the beginning. Here's that opening riff. That's Johnny B. Good. Let's just do it this way. Oh yeah. So that's it. And it's a basic blues riff. There's not anything really fancy going on there, but it becomes the foundation of the song. What you get after that riff, though, is when things get really crazy in this version. The song uses the riff to kind of hold itself up. It also uses a 12-bar concept. But to get from the riff to the 12-bar, we have this 1/4 jam back and forth. And his solo, or fill, I mean, it's just 7 seconds. There's nothing there. But what you hear in this next couple of seconds is an example of how you can look at every single note that Hendrix played and get so much out of it, okay? So during this 1/4 jam, there's a slow bluesy phrase, which is followed immediately by these right-hand harmonics that give the notes extra attack. Then he goes way up the neck and then darts back down to echo the opening riff and signal the beginning of the verse. So check out this 6 seconds. Okay, so what you heard there is almost like a slow blues. I'm playing a solo, and then right up into the upper registers with that right hand harmonics. It's like ting, 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 and then settle back down in the riff so that we can get to the actual singing part of the song. That kind of dynamics over such a short period, I imagine it's something that he didn't even have to think about. And what you hear is efficiency. He could do like a Buddy Guy riff. He can immediately follow with some disruptive technical innovations. That's the right hand harmonics, and then get back immediately without missing a breath into the blues phrase that gets us to the vocal. That's a type of musical adroitness that you don't hear. I can't compare it to anything. Now, the verse has this 12-bar structure, and Hendrix is going to double the vocal melody on guitar. So I don't know about the studio version, but in this version, there's no rhythm guitar. But because he had been playing with a lot of distortion, it fills up the space. And then it also gives like extra deference to the rhythm section. So he's emphasizing that melody, but without the rhythm guitar, you can hear the bass and drums better. I don't know if this was intentional or just an incident of going out and playing as a trio, but check out the verses. I want to say about the vocals, what you get in this song is really a reinterpretation of an old blues form that it reminds me immediately of what the Allman Brothers were playing, I think at roughly the same time, a song called One Way Out. And that was an old tune. I don't think that they take credit for that. But the idea of the other guy being there and then some other guy getting ready to get there and hand me down my running shoes, the walking shoes, the whole get me my shoes so I can get the hell out of here is classic blues music, classic blues lyrics. All right. So we come to the solo. What you get for this solo is, again, super efficiency. Everything you need in an incredibly small space. So the first thing that happens is you get the big bend where the solo kind of announces itself. Thank you, Dolly. And then you get the Octavia and more right-hand harmonics to give us that almost San Francisco psychedelic amble. I mean, it almost sounds like old Jerry Garcia. It almost sounds like Mike Bloomfield, but with more effects. So that's what happens through the first 12-bar cycle. It's setting up what comes next. And so for the next thing he does, this was a trick that was happening every night. So it wasn't, or every time they were playing this song, it wasn't special for this particular night, but it's a really gnarly, grisly version of Rimsky-Korsakov, Flight of the Bumblebee. That's right. You're going to hear Hendrix in a second playing classical music. Now, it's a pretty well-known piece of classical music, but it's still classical music. And yeah, it's a gimmick. I'm sure they rehearsed it. The bass part changes to emphasize it. But, think about what this stands for. I mean, Hendrix is the Walt Whitman of rock guitar here. He contains multitudes. He hears all the music. So what's so extraordinary? Really hard for me to understand. And he could pretty much play all the music at the same time, too. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the gimmick, but I think as we consider Hendrix's legacy, you can't help but look at this. It is inescapable proof that he was listening to and even playing classical music, even if it's tongue-in-cheek. So check this out. 2 cycles on the 12-bar with the Flight of the Bumblebee interlude coming at the second cycle. You can say, well, he doesn't really get out of it cleanly. I mean, I guess one thing that you can say about this tune is it's 3 minutes of a much, much longer show. So I don't have a problem with it being a little rough around the edges. I think it is more meant as a delight for the audience to hear something that A, they know, but B, they weren't expecting. After he does the stunt, he gets back into the classic 1/4 jam, or maybe 1/4/7/4, but this is time with the vocal refrain instead of the guitar solo. So he's, inventing a new music kind of as he goes. He's creating a space for rock music. It's based on existing forms, but it's also completely new and unique. Check this out. So you got this vocal jam, and then, there's going to be some closing hits. He's going to walk it down. But those things, after that vocal jam happens, those things are just, they're just transitions to Jimmy doing his very special, very unique Jimmy thing. And by that, I mean his real solo, a solo that doesn't really feature bass or drums, just Jimi Hendrix, Star Spangled Banner style. And there are a lot of these moments, even for a more casual Jimi Hendrix fan like myself, you still hear him do this thing a lot at the end of songs. And I don't know if this is a type of expression that, grew out of his, I think Jimmy was in competition with The Who early on to see who could get crazier at the end of a song. I don't know, but I can say with certainty that this is a trick that he obviously enjoys and he was so good at. It sounds like he could completely lose himself, almost like seeing, an infinite world in a tiny drop of water, like taking a victory lap to celebrate the end of the song. And a lot of people have tried to imitate this. I mean, Stevie Ray got pretty close. Neil Young, he did like a whole album of feedback endings that he had been doing on tour. He just tried to restructure them as actual songs. But no one has ever or will ever do it like Hendrix. He could do several of these per night, and they were all fantastic little pure improvs, pure emotion that did not ever get old or repetitive. So listen to the hits going into the ending, and then, the big Hendrix thing with the guitar solo. Low bits that he did at the end are, or however you want to describe them. I mean, sonically, they're amazing. And, this one's no exception. You've got everything. You've got the whammy bar. You've got the riffs. You've got just the right effects. And I always think of that as pretty much the most signature Hendrix sound. So that's it. In just 3 minutes of music. And then the last thing you hear, if I hadn't faded out the track, is he's just tuning up and getting ready for the next masterpiece. So much genius, all in such a small and extraordinary space. Anyway, that's it for my Hendrix essay. Thank you so much for listening, and I will look forward to talking to you again soon in the Escape Pod. The MPOMI Escape Pod is written, produced, and edited by Michael Pomerantz. All music by Michael Pomerantz. Thank you for listening. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're listening on a podcast, please subscribe and rate the podcast. We will see you next time in the Escape Pod.